Good evening and welcome to the March 8th, 2021 meeting of the Auburn Board of Selectmen. This meeting is being recorded, and I also have an additional announcement. This open meeting of the Auburn Board of Selectmen is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, which suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, please call 1-408-650-3123 and enter access code 235-235-861. Or the public can join via computer at global.gotomeeting.com/join/235-235-861. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. As a preliminary matter, this is Doreen Goodrich, Chair of the Board. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Berthiaume?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Wren?
Yes.
Town officials and employees participating, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Town Manager Julie Jacobson?
Yes.
Assistant Town Manager and CFO Ed Kazanovich?
Yes.
Administrative Assistant Sharon Kwiatkowski?
Yes.
Please note that this meeting is being recorded by cable access television. Please also note that each vote taken at this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Having said that, the first agenda we have is a 6 p.m. executive session in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, Strategy with respect to litigation. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'll
Mr.
make
Berthiaume.
a motion that we go into executive session in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to deliberate upon matters which, if done in an open meeting, could detrimentally affect the position of the town regarding strategy with respect to litigation, to come out of executive session and to reconvene in an open meeting. No, that'd be the end of the motion.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Berthiaume and a second by Mr. La Liberty. By a roll call vote, Mr. Berthiaume?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. I declare that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body relative to litigation, and that the board will come out of executive session and reconvene in open session. I'll now ask all members to leave this meeting and log on to the executive session. So moving on with the agenda, we do have a public hearing for A at 7 p.m. As I stated, it's not quite 7 o'clock, so we'll move on. We have no communication. Under Board of Selectmen general items, we have the proposed zoning bylaw changes for the May 4th, 2021 annual town meeting. This would be a vote to transmit the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the planning board for public hearings in accordance with Chapter 40, Section 5. There are 2 zoning bylaws submitted for the annual town meeting warrant. So, does anyone have any comments, questions?
Through the chair, if I may, I just want to point out that we have Town Planner Adam Menard on this meeting. And if there are any specific questions, Adam would be happy to answer them.
Great. Hi, Adam. Do members have any questions or comments? With the action the board will be taking is to transmit for the public hearing. But do members have any questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we transmit the articles to the, the two zoning bylaws, that we transmit the articles to the planning board to hold the required public hearings in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Berthium and a second by Mr. La Liberty. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, by a roll call vote. Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you. The next item we have, and I moved things around here. We did have one gift acceptance come in today to the Fire Rescue Department from Ray and Dee Reeder in the amount of $200. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. La Liberty and a second by Mr. Wren. By roll call vote, Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you. And as many of you may have seen, there was a lovely parade and the presentation of the Boston Post Kane Award for Phyllis Gallant. This request for the proclamation came in after our meeting, and it did meet with our guidelines, and we have done similar proclamations for the Boston Post Kane Award recipients in the past. So I authorize the proclamation to be ratified at this meeting. So is there a motion to ratify the proclamation for Phyllis Gallant, who received the Boston Post Kane Award this past Sunday?
So moved.
That was Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. La Liberty is the second. If there's no discussion, all by a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty,
Yes.
Mr. Wren,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Berthium,
I'd like to also, from what our note said, I'd like to publicly wish her a happy birthday today, too.
yeah, 100 years old today. Still wearing her pumps. She is an amazing, incredible lady. So happy birthday from the board. Moving on, we have town manager items. We still have about 7 minutes, so I'm going to ask the town manager to present the 2021 Open Space and Recreation Plan Survey.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Adam Menard, our town planner, I just want to remind the board that earlier this year, and Adam can fill you in, but we did reconstitute the Open Space and Recreation Committee and appointed some new members to that committee. And the open space plan is due to be updated again. Seems like we just did it, but it's that time again. So Adam has been leading the charge on this. So I'm going to turn to Adam to explain what the survey is and what we're doing.
Yes, thank you for having me. Mr. Wren is actually the selectman's delegate to that particular committee. He's been coming to all our meetings. We appreciate his input. The Open Space Committee is anxious for public opinion on recreation opportunities and conservation land in Auburn. It's important to have the public's input on what the residents would like to see, what we like to do, what amenities are lacking, or which amenities I'd like to see improved. So the committee and myself has put together a survey. It's currently live now. We've had about 130 respondents so far. Wanted to come before this board today to further publicize the availability of the survey. It's fairly brief. It's only about 15 questions. I'm just trying to get input about what residents currently use, what the conditions are, what new amenities like to see, that kind of information. And we're putting together that survey. Once we'll complete the deadline we currently have on the survey is March 15th, which is about a week from now. So we'd like everybody to, if possible, to complete the survey by then. The plan is to put all the information together, and the committee will be taking information to develop goals and objectives to put in the plan. We're also going to be having, the details aren't finalized yet, but some kind of workshop or forum, presumably still remote due to the COVID situation, but a further way to kind of present the survey to gather some more feedback. These are all items that are important, and they're also required by the state for the plan. The open space plan is kind of specifically structured by the state and approved by the state. So the goal is to have a draft complete by the end of the summer and hopefully approved by the state by the end of the year. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I'm muted.
Thanks, Adam.
Are there any questions or comments? Does the town manager have anything you want to add?
I'm good. I just want to thank the committee for all their work. I know there is a lot of work that goes into these plans, even an update, as opposed to starting from the beginning. So I want to thank Mr. Wren for representing the board and all the other members that we have. We really need to get this done. And one of the most important things is to have this on file. It makes us eligible for certain grants at the state level. So we definitely want to make sure that we keep these plans updated all the time. So I want to thank everyone.
Thank you. Too many papers. So nothing else on this, Mrs. Jacobson? Okay. The next item we have is a request from the town manager for approval for a one-year extension to the 5-year intermunicipal agreement between the town of Oxford and the town of Auburn for the transportation of wastewater, which expires March 14th, 2021. Mrs. Jacobson.
Through the chair, I'm going to turn this to DPW Director Bill Coyle, who's on the call, and he may be tag teaming this with Joanna Paquin, who's our Assistant DPW Director, as well as our Sewer Commissioner. But this is an agreement, and I can just give you the overall summary, but Bill's much better at the details. But this is an agreement that we signed 5 years ago. And due to a couple of issues, we just felt that it was not appropriate, nor could we get it done, to enter into negotiations for a subsequent agreement, given COVID, given some staffing changes, both on our side. Joanna is new to this role, and our sewer commissioner retired last year. And on the Oxford side, I don't believe they even had a DPW director who oversees this until within the last month or so. And there are some projects going on in Auburn that make it, hi Joanna, make it a little too premature for us to go any further on this. So we're recommending keep everything as is and just give us a 1-year extension. And within that 1 year, we can negotiate. But I'm going to turn it to Bill to see if he can just add a couple details as to what this agreement is and why we have it.
Sure. Thank you, Julie, Madam Chair, members of the board. This is an agreement, as the town manager mentioned, is for a 5-year period. And it allows Oxford basically to convey its sewage through the town of Auburn to the Upper Blackstone Sewer Treatment Plant. They do not have their own sewer treatment plant, so that again, that is they utilize the town of Auburn's infrastructure. And the last time we upgraded this agreement was 5 years ago. There's a number of things that we're currently looking at. One, from the town of Oxford's perspective, the interbasin transfer, which allows them to take water that they draw from the French River basin. So they basically pull water out of the ground from the French River Basin area and discharge it into the Blackstone River Basin. They currently are permitted for 80,000 gallons per day. They have contacted DEP to look to increase that quantity. So it would be premature for us to entertain a new agreement with them with any increase. So this 1 year extension would give them time to communicate with DEP and correspond with DEP to see if they're able to increase that volume. And also there are several other changes that we want to discuss with them in terms of how the billing proceeds, some of the cost sharing items that we have that we want to modify with the town of Oxford. They do, as the town manager mentioned, they do have a new DPW director. And obviously, you know, with Joanna's new role as the sewer superintendent, there's been several changes. There's also several major projects that Oxford has currently that they want to see how they progress and potentially evaluate what their needs are. So this 1 year extension would buy us some time to try to answer a lot of these questions. So for that, certainly from the DPW, we would recommend approval of the 1 year extension. And Joanna, did I miss anything that you'd like to add relative? No, thank you. We'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Do board members have any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I just have a quick question.
Mr. Berthium?
So you mentioned that the agreement is for Oxford to have, was it 80,000 gallons a day?
Currently, the agreement is for up to 100,000 gallons per day. But they only have approval from DEP from their permit for 80,000. So it's a little unclear why the number is different. But the town of Auburn has granted approval for up to 100,000 gallons per day. So, yeah, so exactly that. It's something that they may be looking to potentially increase that volume. I'm sure they will be. So it's a matter of, do we also want additional evaluation of our infrastructure to be performed to find out what the capacity increase we could potentially allow if that's something we so desired.
And to follow up through the chair, so our infrastructure is in place. We're in agreement with them to allow up to 100,000 gallons a day. And what recourse do we have if all of a sudden they're using 150,000 gallons a day? You know, you can't shut sewer off, can you? And also, you know, would that, what potential harm would that be to our infrastructure?
Yeah, so there is language in the agreement for us to, I believe, Joanna, I don't know if you have the agreement, the exact language, if it's what is stated. I know we do have, you know, some language to protect us. And I agree, you can't shut off their sewerage. I think it gives us the ability to renegotiate with them, whether or not it's an increased rate. If you want to add, Joanna, to that.
I don't have the agreement in front of me, but it is, I believe it's to renegotiate the rates that we're charging Oxford.
And in terms of our infrastructure, I think we haven't seen any issues with capacity. The 100,000 gallons per day, if they had any exceedances, I don't think it would create an issue. But there is language in the agreement to protect the town of Auburn if that were to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else from board members?
Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Coyle. Are we, initially we accepted this be when they built the new Oxford High School. Are we taking on more than that capacity now? Are we actually taking other businesses other than just the high school? It could be that my information, I remember that clearly from many town meetings past, but we're potentially contemplating taking something beyond the high school.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter, it is additional, there are additional businesses beyond the high school, which was based on the 100,000 gallons per day. And they are potentially looking to add more businesses going forward. But it's not just the high school currently.
Did you have a follow-up, Mr. Carpenter?
Yeah, I do. As far as we're talking about infrastructure, and I know this is part of a wider discussion with other infrastructure in town failing seemingly with some regularity, unfortunately. Are they in any way reimbursing us for work, giving us any money towards maintaining the system in addition to just a fee?
That is something that we talked about that we want to change in the agreement. Right now, it's a set fee by the gallon. But we did discuss that one of the costs that we're incurring is that if there is a break, if the break is in a sewer line that also conveys their sewerage, we want them to share in that cost. Currently, that's not in the agreement, and certainly we have experienced breaks that I think would have been something they would have had to share in. I think the most recent break we had about a month ago or less on Route 12 near Sword Street, that would not have involved them because the sewage through Oxford does not get conveyed in that area. With the break we had about 10, 12 years ago up on Packagug Hill would have involved them. So we want to put language in the new agreement that if there is a break or any other major expense, that they share in the cost based on basically the ratio of their flow to our flow. And they would be also, would have to contribute to that repair and the cost of that repair.
I just have one more, I think, Mrs. Goodrich, if I could.
Please go ahead.
What is our outer limit? I know when this was originally proposed, and again, my information may be well out of date at this point, but I remember at the time Mr. Mitchell said that our capacity was more than sufficient to take on the high school. I'm guessing that whatever these extra businesses are, we also have capacity for that. But are we anywhere near our own limits, or as we look at development in our own community, are we in any way jeopardizing, poor choice of words, but impacting, probably a better word, anything from our own economic viability?
Yeah, great question. It's certainly one of the things we want to look at before the year is up, to see are there any locations. At this point, nothing jumps out at us other than modifications to pump stations that would have to occur. For example, the Auburn Oxford pump station, we had that station evaluated a few months ago, and the results came back that for the 40B project that Eastman Partners is building, that station can handle that additional flow. However, if Oxford's project that Eastman Partners was looking to move forward with was something the town was going to entertain, allowed to go through town, there would be improvements needed to that station. It didn't seem as though there were going to be major improvements. I think changes in impeller sizes to the pumps, but there were changes to that station required. We certainly want to look at if there are any other areas that we feel as though capacity is an issue, and make sure we address those. And also other potential concerns we may have, whether or not we want their pipeline to go through our pump station, or is it possible for it to be conveyed by gravity? So these are things we want to look at. So we'll definitely look further into it over the next year to evaluate the system to make sure that if there's additional improvements that are needed, that we identify them.
Okay. I think I just have one more, Mrs. Goodrich, if I could. So they're operating under their own permits. We don't have to worry, as I know we have an agenda item later on the MS4 permit. We have no concerns currently or any exposure if they somehow or someone should hook up and do anything. We're not worried about outfalls or any sort of contamination from the Oxford side. We're not in any way liable for anything that might be occurring, correct?
Right, that would be the town of Oxford. We are only conveying the sewage to the Upper Blackstone. The discharges to the Blackstone River from the Upper Blackstone clean water facility. So it wouldn't be our responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion, please?
I'll make a motion that we extend I'll just make sure that I don't need to word it in a certain way. I will make a motion that we grant a 1-year extension to the 5-year intermunicipal agreement between the town of Oxford and the town of Auburn for the transportation of wastewater, which expires March 14th, 2021.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Carpenter and a second by Mr. La Liberty. Is there any discussion? By a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes, sorry.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Ren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you. Thank you for that,
Thank you.
Mr. Coyle. I think you have one more on here, though. Don't go anywhere. Next, we have the proposed general bylaw amendment for May 4th, 2021, annual town meeting for the stormwater water management. Mrs. Jacobson.
Thank you, through the chair. We also have joining us this evening, Eilish Corey. Hi, Eilish. Eilish is our civil engineer, and she was hired to work on everything stormwater related. So Eilish is going to present to you this evening a presentation on what this bylaw would do just in general. And then obviously if you have specific questions, she can answer them. DPW Director Coyle can answer them. And I see Joanna Paquin is still on the call too. So I also, if I may, just want to thank Bill and Joanna for all their work on the IMA and all the work that they're about to be taking on for the IMA. Because we know there's a lot of analysis that still has to be done. So we appreciate the board giving us the year to do that. There's a lot of work ahead of us. So right now, I know Mike Marino just made Eilish a presenter. So she can walk you through this PowerPoint. And again, I always point it out because it's a tool that I use a lot. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a little picture of a camera, and then you'll see a plus and a minus. So if you want to either increase it, or I don't know who would need to do that, decrease it so it's smaller. But if you want to make it larger so it's a little easier to read the slide, all you have to do is hit that plus sign and you can make it bigger to your own individual needs. So thanks, I'm going to turn it over.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation that's up right now? Is it good? Okay. All right, great. So first of all, hello. This is actually the first time we've gotten to meet in person. So it's very nice to see all of your faces after getting to see them written down so much. So like Julie said, my name is Eilish. I work down at the Department of Public Works, and one of the things that I do work on is our stormwater management program. And the reason that I am talking to you tonight is because we are going to be putting forth an article for Springtown meeting to make some changes to our existing stormwater bylaw. And this is in response to some new federal requirements that have come down in recent years that are more stringent than what's in our current bylaw, which was written to the state standards. So we have a deadline to make these changes, and it's this upcoming June. And if we don't make those changes, there are potentially financial penalties that we definitely don't want to have to deal with. So to just kind of give you a little bit of a background, I'm going to start at the very beginning. So what is stormwater? And it's really any type of precipitation that comes from the sky. So 99% of the time that is rain, but it can also cover things like snow or sleet or hail. We're really concerned about it in terms of our management program when it hits the ground and becomes what's called runoff. And for the most part, we're concerned because just by virtue of development, we as a society contribute pollutants that often sit on the ground. So when stormwater hits it, those pollutants get swept away into our nearest water body. So the old way that we have kind of dealt with this was to just kind of get the dirty water away from us as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, that's kind of catching up with us, especially in recent years, because all of those pollutants are now becoming very concentrated in the water bodies, and that's having some significant harmful effects for both environmental health, but public health as well. So there has been a movement in recent years to go towards a more sustainable method of management of stormwater. And the idea behind it is to really mimic natural processes and to deal with stormwater when it comes down on the ground by infiltrating or treating it immediately. And this prevents it from picking up more pollutants and also from spreading those pollutants around. So in kind of support of this new method of management, the federal government, through the Environmental Protection Agency, has issued Auburn, as well as 259 of our municipal friends in Massachusetts, this thing called an MS4 permit. And it is essentially a stormwater permit. So this initially went into effect back in 2003, but was renewed in 2018. And you've probably heard of it before. It caused a lot of commotion because of the increase in standards and the increases in requirements for both what the town has to do, but also for what private developers have to do as well. The thing that we're most concerned about right now is the fact that there are additional standards, excuse me, that are above what the state requires for stormwater design. And so we are the enforcement agency for this permit, the town is, so we're responsible for ensuring that they're upheld. Oops, I'm sorry, I skipped around there. Okay, correct place. So there's a lot to the MS4 permit, and I'm not going to get into it. So I really just want to draw your attention to these three topics that are included in it. And they're important because they're what's driving the changes to the bylaw. So if you have any other questions on the MS4 permit, I'd be happy to answer them. I just don't want to fool you into thinking this is all we have to do. But really the ones that are in front of you have to do with private development. And it has to do with what contractors do during construction, but then also what they have to do for long-term maintenance after construction is completed to ensure that they don't just throw these things into the ground and then leave them to molder and eventually not work. So in order to see these things through, we do need to have additional regulatory mechanisms than what is currently in place. So for what is currently in place is we have this existing bylaw under the general bylaws. It was put in place as a result of the last permit, and it authorized what's called a land disturbance permit that a developer would have to get as part of their pre-construction permitting process, very similar to what you would do in terms of going in front of Conservation Commission or planning. It also authorizes a stormwater committee, and the current members are shown on the right there, but it is all members of the town. There aren't any outside people on it currently. And the Stormwater Committee was given the authorization to enact regulations. And if you're kind of wondering why we need both a bylaw and a regulations, it's because the bylaw provides the outline, the skeleton, and the regulations provide the details, or if you're going with the body metaphor, like the meat of what's required. And so although we actually have this bylaw in place, the regulations were never developed, and therefore the bylaw was never actually enforced. So we would like to change that. Definitely, we would like to start enforcing this bylaw, but we would also like to make the changes that the federal government is requiring of us right now. And as it's currently written, we are not meeting those federal standards. So in order to meet the June 30th, 2021 deadline, we would have to see the changes to the bylaw made at upcoming town meeting and also create a set of regulations that will allow us to enforce the bylaw. So we are in the process of drafting those regulations right now. But the way that they have to be written to meet our requirements doesn't exactly sync with the way the current bylaw is written. So we are proposing a fair amount of text changes to the bylaw. But although I think when you see the final product, it is going to look like a good amount of changes, we're really not changing the overall intent of the bylaw, just updating it to where it needs to be to meet those requirements. And those updates generally fall under four categories listed here. But really bringing it up to modern standards. Stormwater is a very rapidly evolving technology, believe it or not. So we'd like to make sure that what's written there doesn't reflect sort of old attitudes to how it was handled. We'd also like to make things a little clearer. For instance, there's a couple definitions in there that it's the same word, but it has different definitions assigned to it. So obviously we want to get rid of anything that's contradictory to make it easier for us to enforce and for developers to follow. We'd also like to move the majority of any technical references or procedural language to the regulations. And that will give the Stormwater Committee a little bit more flexibility for making updates to them. So when more regulatory changes come or there's some snag in the way that the town administers the permit, we can respond quicker than going through this whole bylaw changing process again. And last is that we would like to update the thresholds for when this land disturbance permit is needed. There is a stormwater coalition that services the central Massachusetts area, and they performed an audit of about 30 of our neighbors, including Auburn, to look at their existing bylaws. And they found that Auburn has one of the most, I guess you would call it conservative thresholds. I guess another way of putting that is that we require the most amount of permits. And really that's not getting us much. It's really just raising the amount of administration that needs to be done without really getting a lot of benefit from water quality. So we would like to change those thresholds so that we are more in step with our neighbors and we're not seen as, the people who require an extreme amount of permits. So following this going to town meeting and hopefully getting passed, the Stormwater Committee would meet to vote in the regulations, and then the Department of Public Works would take the lead in administering the permit. And we would do that in partnership with all the other permitting departments, because there is a lot of overlap between this permit and something like the Conservation Commission would issue. So we're gonna have to work very closely with everyone to make sure that we're not all issuing different types of enforcements, and we all have our documentation in place. We're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to work. But once it does, we are going to be updating the town's website to have guides and educational documents for developers who are trying to figure out this new process. And that's really it. So are there any questions or comments I can answer at this time?
Well, I'll just say that you did a great job for your first presentation before the Board of Selectmen. So it's not easy, especially doing it remotely. So great job. I'm going to open it up to board comments or questions.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Carpenter, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, to whoever can answer this. How is this, you did touch on conservation, how is this going to affect the other land use boards? And is there going to be a fee in and above what they're going to be paying to, say, conservation, potentially Board of Health or the planning board for this type of action?
Sure. So there are some differences. So for example, the Conservation Commission only covers projects that have some impact on either the wetlands directly or if you're within a certain buffer zone from those wetlands. This permit covers really any type of development, whether or not it is near wetlands. So while there is definitely going to be some overlap, we are going to be catching projects with this permit that wouldn't otherwise go to something like conservation. So right now, we are talking to Mike Garland, the head of the Conservation Commission, to try and start the process of how we're going to figure out exactly how they are going to coordinate. Because this permit does have more stringent requirements that would be required of stormwater than other permits issued by the town, we would definitely highly encourage developers to come to this one first. And that ensures that they make all of the necessary changes they need to the design. Because we definitely don't want something where they go to planning and they go to conservation and they get approvals and then they come to us and we say, oh, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. So again, still trying to figure that out. In terms of fees, there will be a small flat fee that will be assigned for the review. And that is to cover the Department of Public Works costs. There will also be a fee for site inspections that are required. And the amount of inspections depends upon the size of the project. And then we also have an option in our regulations to hire a consultant at the expense of the applicant to do that review, a more in-depth review than what we would do at Public Works. And if that was the case, we would most likely work with the planning department, who does something very similar with their site plan reviews to ensure that the applicant isn't paying for that multiple times across different permits.
Okay, thank you. Just one follow-up, if I could, Mrs. Goodrich.
Of course.
Conservation has a local bylaw. Is this going to bump up against? I know they did some interesting things with what under state law would be a buffer zone, but now is a resource area. How does this interact? How would this bylaw interact with the local bylaw? And are there going to be any changes contemplated to the local conservation bylaw?
Sure. Right now, as the wetland bylaw currently stands, there wouldn't be any conflicts because the standards in this permit would supersede the standards in that one, if that makes sense. The only change that I see potentially in the future would be changing the wetland bylaw so that its standards would match this of the land disturbance permit. Again, but that's not something that needs to be done immediately since it's not causing an immediate conflict, but it might just make our lives a little easier in the future. I shouldn't say our, like the town who is administering and reviewing and the developers who have to follow these. It might make it easier in the future, but based on what other towns are doing, it's not unusual to have differences in the wetland bylaw and the stormwater bylaw. So it's a really wait and see issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I do have a question. I'm not sure who will take this, but this is a excuse me, a bylaw that will go to town meeting because they're the ones who will vote and approve this. So how are we getting information out to town meeting prior to town meeting? I've just sadly seen in the past that so much work goes into these general bylaws, be it stormwater management, zoning, planning, whatever, and they're very technical, and unfortunately many of these don't pass because town meeting members don't feel that they are adequately comfortable with passing a bylaw. So how will we educate town meeting on this prior to town meeting?
Sure, Madam Chair, I'll try to answer that one. I know that we're trying to present to different boards Eilish has gone before conservation and presented to them about the changes. We wanted to go before the Board of Selectmen to bring you up to be informed of the changes, and other boards as well. Certainly, we could look at additional public hearings. It's difficult with with COVID, so it may be better that we could try, and I'll defer to the town manager, whether or not we do a mailing in advance to town meeting members, so they have the ability to ask questions, or we could hold a separate informational meeting for town meeting members only. We're certainly open to any suggestions that you may have in order to inform town meeting members as much as possible of the changes and give them the opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah. So just a thought, and we certainly don't have anything to do with this, except you made a great presentation to the Board of Selectmen. I know, Mr. Carpenter mentioned, the other land use committees. You might consider taking this before any of those other boards, planning, land use, conservation, and, have it on their agenda and ask them for a vote of support. So you can take it to town meeting and say, we have support from these 5 boards. And I think town meeting members are comfortable if they know it has gone through, a rigorous process, at least through the other boards.
Sure, and I believe that's Eilish's intent to go to the other boards as well. And one of the important things I think to note too is that this is for changes to a bylaw that already exists. I think the real meat in this is the regulations, which have not been adopted yet. So once the bylaw is in place, which we currently have a bylaw, regulations need to be adopted and approved, and that'll be a public process as well. So that's where the discussion on and correct me if I'm wrong, Eilish, but that's where the thresholds relative to the requirements for the land use disturbance permit and fees and probably the issues that would concern the residents and developers mostly, and they would be able to provide us with comments, and we could make changes, as Eilish mentioned, even after this bylaw is approved, because the regulations can be changed later without going back to town meeting. If we see there's something that's not working well, we can change the regulations. So I think there's a lot of information that we'll still need to get out to the public, in particular with also adopting the regulations going forward. So I know Eilish's goal is to meet with the boards to get their support before town meeting. So and she has started that already. So with that, Eilish, if you want to add to that.
No, what you said covers it. It is correct that I think any controversial issues, as it were, would be included in the regulations, not in the bylaw itself.
Thank you. So do board members have any additional questions or comments?
Mrs. Goodrich, I just have one more.
Go ahead, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. Actually, piggybacking on Mrs. Goodrich's idea, going to the other boards, which I'm grateful to hear that you've been to them and you're going to more. Has this been presented to the Chamber of Commerce to get their feedback and bring them in early as far as to raise any concerns they may have, especially as it comes to cost and other liabilities that they may be facing as they try and conduct business in the community?
It has not, but that's a pretty good idea. I think that if we were to go in front of them, one thing that we would emphasize is that we're not alone in making these changes. It's something that everyone is, or I shouldn't say everyone, but those 260 communities in the state are either currently doing or have already done. But we'll definitely look into doing that.
Thank you. So I think what we'll do is put this on our next agenda. The team doesn't have to be here. Mrs. Jacobson, of course, is at all our meetings, but the DPW team, we wouldn't expect you to be here. But if members have any questions, they can reach out. But I think, you know, it would be nice to put it on our next agenda to take a vote in support of this, especially with the difficulties of remote access. Again, if we have boards who have had these presentations take a vote of support, it may carry some weight with town meeting. Fully recognizing that this isn't a bylaw that affects us. It's just a presentation that came to us, and we could offer our support.
Could I have one more or a few more questions to the chair?
Certainly.
First of all, thank you, Ms. Corey. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Did you say we may face penalties if we don't get in line with this, or?
Yes, EPA has been very clear that they will be conducting audits of how the towns perform on this permit. And actually, prior to coming to work for the town, I worked for a consultant, a private engineering company, and one of my clients was audited. And it wasn't a good process to be on the receiving end of. The penalties vary. They don't come in out the gate with, $100,000 penalties per day. They do try and work with you on it. But the penalties can range from about $2,500 a day to about $100,000 a day, depending on the severity or where EPA thinks the severity lies. So it is definitely a potential thing that could happen if we don't meet these requirements.
Okay, all right. So in addition to obviously showing various board supports that we're backing these changes, I think that should be made known to town meeting that, this is something we really, it's a federal mandate that we really need to get in line with. Otherwise, I completely agree with you on the peer review planning board. That's a routine exercise that they do, is they peer review most projects. So I think that'd be the proper time to do it when these projects go forward. But my main question was, you had said developer maintenance. Is that post-project that developers would be expected to maintain these systems, or?
Yes, it would be both during construction and after construction. We are going to be requiring that they sign a what we would call a long-term operation and maintenance agreement that will be kept on file at the town, but we're also requiring it to be put in and at the Registry of Deeds. And we are going to be requiring an annual update from, an annual report from any holder of these maintenance agreements. And that's to really hold them accountable, because a lot of times, and I'm sure you've seen them, people will put in like a detention basin, and then no one ever takes care of it. And really that isn't serving anyone. It's not serving the residents of the community that live there, because oftentimes it becomes an eyesore. Oftentimes they don't work like as a technology, so it's not serving the environment. There's also the potential of looking into something where we could potentially enter an agreement with the developer where the town could perform the maintenance with an annual fee to cover our costs of it. But it's definitely something that we're going to be looking much, much closer at in the future for new developments coming in.
I agree with everything you just said there, but in my job, I often see the rise and fall of developers, or the creation of a company and the dissolution of a company when it comes to development. Is that something, could we pass, with everything you just said, could we pass that under HOAs and have that be the residents of a community that or development that's created?
Yes, absolutely. So if the developer isn't planning on holding on to that property after construction, we would require them to submit an update to us, informing us of the new owners, and then that operation and maintenance agreement would be carried forward in any other change of ownership, really as long as the property exists.
To run with the land in perpetuity. Perfect. Thank you.
In perpetuity, yep.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Through the chair, if I may, first of all, I just want to thank Eilish for all her hard work on this. As you can tell, this is really complicated, and she just does a great job. And want to thank Bill also for his work on this. And to let you know, we are waiting to see what warrant articles come in. for the warrant for the annual town meeting, but our plan was to have an informational remote meeting for town meeting members on a couple of those warrant articles that may generate some questions, and we want to get those questions out in the open in advance. So the last couple of years, anytime we've had, whether it be a zoning bylaw that there may be, a lot of questions on, or a general bylaw as this one is, or other items, we've been holding meetings for town meeting members to ask questions in advance, and we found it's very helpful. We also put written information in their packets. So we'll do both. We haven't scheduled that meeting yet. And again, we're just waiting to see what other articles may come in that we want to include in that presentation for town meeting members in advance of town meeting. So probably in early April, we would be doing that. And that would include the library Goddard Park pedestrian bridge project, because we have some funding articles that are going on that, as well as the zoning articles that Adam talked about earlier and were transmitted to planning board, as well as this general bylaw. So right now, those are the items that we would be prepared to present to town meeting members in advance, see if they have any questions, and send them some written materials.
Thank you. So if there's nothing else on this, we're going to just wrap up town manager items. So we have from the police department, request to declare surplus property. In your packet, you have a letter from the chief requesting that the board vote to declare Auburn Police Cruiser 57 as surplus for disposal purposes. Are there any questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to declare Auburn Police Cruiser 57 as surplus for disposal purposes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Wren and a second by Mr. Carpenter. Is there any discussion? By a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty,
Yes.
Mr. Wren,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you. Now we're going to go back to, oh God, I put it over here, to our agenda hearing. Hold on a minute. There we go. Agenda item 4A, the Outback Steakhouse, 452 Southbridge Street, alcoholic beverage license. It's a new officer and director. Is there a motion to open the hearing?
So moved.
We
Second.
have a motion by Mr. Carpenter and a second by Mr. La Liberty. By a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty,
Yes, and point of order, it just wasn't me. I don't know if we need this for the minutes. It wasn't me that seconded. But yes,
It was me, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we had a motion by Mr. Carpenter and a second by Mr. Berthium. Is that correct?
Correct.
So Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to open the hearing. So this is just a routine thing that we need to do. We have the application. The new officer and director involves several locations. There is no change to the daily operation or the staffing at the Auburn location. Do board members have any questions or comments? We did tell them that because this is involving several locations and it doesn't affect the day-to-day operations, that we were not requiring anyone to be here. So if there are no comments or questions, there's no public comment that I see. Is there a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Carpenter, a second by Mr. Berthium to close the hearing. Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty,
yes.
Mr. Wren,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Is there a motion regarding the license application?
I'll make a motion to approve all alcoholic beverages license for the new director officer.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Wren and a second by Mr. Berthium. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, by a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty,
Yes.
Mr. Wren,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So I'm just going to do a quick look here. We've gone back and taken care of everything. We have no tabled items. We have no Board of Selectmen items on the agenda. Do members have anything? Seeing none, we have the minutes of January 25th, 2021. Are there any corrections or omissions? Seeing none, the chair will accept them as written. If there's no additional business before the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second. We have a motion by Mr. Carpenter and a second by Mr. Berthium to adjourn. Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. La Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you, everyone, for a good meeting. We are adjourned. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night, everyone.
Good night,
Sharon.
Sharon. Thank you.